From Toronto Danforth.
Speaker, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I want to thank my colleague for starting off the speech, and I also want to thank our Labour critic, the member from Sudbury, who spoke so well. Thank you. Thank you. I want to review a bit of the situation that we're facing here, and I know my colleague was actually pretty thorough, but you left a little for me, John, and I appreciate that. I had the opportunity to get the briefing on Monday morning, and I had an opportunity to read the press releases by OPG and by the power workers. So everyone is well aware of the central facts. I think it was March 31st, the contract expired between OPG and Power Workers Union. Bargaining ensued. An agreement was reached in the summer and rejected by the membership. That's very important because everything that's been said today by the Premier, the Minister of Labour and the Minister of Energy about this being a high-stakes matter was true then. And frankly, if you'd had a government that was responsible, that was a government that would have sat down immediately and said, wait a minute, we're in a position where we have no agreement between a major employer and a major union. We need to talk to both parties and find a way forward. That's the kind of approach, not brinkmanship, not waiting until you have a crisis. What John Snowbelin said, don't let a good crisis go to waste, or we need to invent one. It makes me wonder what we're dealing with here today. But in the summer, the government was entirely aware of everything that they have put on the table today, and yet we didn't see any action. What did we see? We saw a government obsessed with beating up the City of Toronto to the exclusion of just about all other business. That is, oh, sorry, I forgot Buck of Beer. How could I forget Buck of Beer? Came so quickly, went so quickly. And so we have a government whose priorities were Buck of Beer and beating up on Toronto and not keeping the lights on as they are so passionately avowing today. No, you guys, let's face it, that was a low priority issue for you. You were quite happy to say, okay, looks like we could have a shutdown of the electricity system. That's not our priority. That's not where we're going. And so that passed. Things trundled on. Now, as I understand it from both PWU and OPG releases, the agreement that came forward for a vote in, I guess, end of November, beginning of December, was effectively the same as the one that was put out and rejected in the summer. What kind of movement is that? What kind of bargaining is that? That's the kind of bargaining you engage in when you think, hey, I've got a government that will do anything I want to break up collective bargaining. Anything I want. So we've got a situation now where, according to the briefing I got the other day, lights are going to be on past Christmas because it takes a while to deal with laying up those reactors. We have hydroelectric fleet that's going on. We have gas-powered plants that have an awful lot of capacity that isn't being used right now. There's a fair amount of resilience in the system. So to say that as of Friday, boy, little Timmy's lights are going to go out is not accurate. Not according to the briefing I got from the government anyway, unless they've changed their briefing notes, and I look forward to seeing the rewritten notes that are being prepared by the minister. So I want to say, Speaker, that this afternoon we heard a variety of statements by the Minister of Labour, the Minister of Energy, and the Premier. And I have to say, it's extraordinary to me to hear from that government and those ministers and that Premier that we are going to be put in such a difficult situation. A government that neglected the situation for months, ignored the options that it had, and decided to go for broke, roll the dice, and see what kind of crisis we'd face now. I know, I have to admit, that it's very handy for the government, given everything that's been going on with the OPP, going on with the Premier apparently asking for a custom RV, kept off the books. It's a really good diversion from those issues. I have no doubt about it. I do wonder what the thinking was that went on, and I'm very curious to know what the discussions were between OPG and the Premier over the past few months. Speaker, time and again, people on that side said that the PWU, the Power Workers Union, represents exceptional individuals, and I have no doubt of that. That's one area where I will agree with them. We have dedicated people who work in demanding and exacting circumstances. Power workers provide power in Ontario, and frankly, Speaker, we know that they are dedicated, as have been power workers around the world when they have faced crises and emergencies with their hydro systems, with their electricity systems. So I have no doubt of that, and I think treating them fairly is a fundamental demand on this legislature. Is it treating them fairly to ignore? Is it treating them fairly to ignore their charter rights and shut them down as soon as you can and ignore the conflict that was going on from the summer? Is that really showing respect for them? It was interesting to hear the Premier say that he stands up for the frontline workers and not for the union bosses. Well, he should remember that it was the frontline workers who rejected this deal. So if he's standing up for the frontline workers, what is he going to do to move that deal so it's one that works for them? What is he going to do if he respects them that much? And frankly, Speaker, what he's going to do is he's going to bring forward this bill, and he's going to do his best to make sure that their rights get trampled on. Exactly. That is what he's going to do. That is what all those fine words amount to. Nothing. Nothing. Nothing for working people, because that government is not a government for working people. It's a government for people with money. Simple as that, and nothing more and nothing less. Speaker, I find it extraordinary that we are here today. As my colleague from Temiskaming made very clear, the government has the votes. I went through this with the Liberals. They were amazing. You guys, you worked with the Liberals hand in hand every time it came to crushing workers' rights. Bill 115, we stood up against that. We knew that it was an abrogation of charter rights. Unions argued that. I argued with the Liberal Minister of Education at the time, saying, you don't have the legal basis to do this. She assured me entirely that they did, and they lost at the Supreme Court because we can see what they're doing. People can see what they're doing. Two parties, anti-Labour, united in beating up on working people in this province. No question about it. No question. Speaker, the government has the votes it needs to pass this bill, but we do not stand here complicit with their actions. We are not complicit. If we had had discussions in the summer about how to resolve the gap between OPG and its workers, that would have been a constructive approach. Could have been. Could have been. But they weren't interested in negotiating. They weren't interested in resolving that. They were interested in coming to this moment so that they can run around like crazy, telling people it's going to be cold and it's going to be dark. Well, frankly, Speaker, they can do what they can do. They have the votes, but we don't have to vote with them. We can say that there is another course of action that people in Ontario could take, should take, if you're going to have a society where people have decent incomes, decent benefits, decent working conditions. That's what has to be protected. And frankly, this crisis has so much about it that seems to me to be invented. So much that seems to be invented. Speaker, I don't think I have a lot more to add right now, but I want to say that this government will be remembered, as the Liberals before them were remembered, as governments that stood up against working people in Ontario. Thank you.